So I recently picked up my first ever medium format camera, the Yashica Mat LM. And this camera is a TLR camera from the late 50s or early 60s. And I picked it up because I wanted to get into medium format photography, but I actually wasn't ready for just how different it is from using an SLR, which is all I'd ever used. So I've put 3 rolls through this camera now, and I've absolutely fallen in love with it. So if you're not familiar with TLRs, like I wasn't, you basically have 2 lenses here on the front. So you have the top lens, which is called your viewing lens, and the bottom lens, which is called your taking lens. And they're called that for kind of obvious reasons. So this top lens is what you're looking through when you're composing your picture, and the bottom is the lens that actually takes the photograph. So if you're looking for one of these, ideally both pieces of glass are clean, free of haze and fungus and all that, but the one you're really concerned about is that bottom one, because that's what's going to end up taking your photos. So on the front, you also have 5 levers along the taking lens, as well as your shutter button. So at first it was kind of intimidating to see all of these antiquated knobs and levers on this thing, because I didn't know how to use any of them. But it's actually pretty simple. It has all the same principles of using an SLR. So looking at the front of the camera, on the right hand side, we have a lever that sets the aperture. So this one goes all the way down to 3.5 and stops down to 22. And on the left hand side, we can set our shutter speed. So from my understanding, this was kind of a budget level camera when it came out, and I don't know if this is because of that or just the nature of its age. It only goes down to 300th of a second, which, is fine, but a little bit limiting. So you just kind of got to work within the constraints of the camera. So we can go all the way down to 300 and then all the way up to bulb, where it's just open as long as you hold down the shutter button. And then just kind of as an aside on the craftsmanship of these things, it's kind of cool. So I won't pretend to know all the inner workings of it, but you can hear there's actually a couple timers in there. So for example, if you set your shutter speed to 1 and hit the shutter button, you can actually hear a gear in there keeping the shutter open for the duration of that 1 second. Because obviously this camera is free of electronics. And then behind our shutter speed is another lever, and this is to cock the shutter. So whereas most modern cameras, you just kind of hit the shutter button and it fires, you have to cock it prior every time here. So pull that down and then click. And then before your next photo, you cock it again and pull it down and click. And then behind your aperture, we have a lever that relates to what kind of flash you were using. So when this camera came out, they still had the older style sort of bulb flash, or you could use the more modern one. So this just syncs up the shutter to one or the other. I just leave mine on X because it enables me to pull the last lever we haven't talked about, which is the timer. So here on the bottom, we actually have a timer. So if you pull it all the way over, it sets the timer for 15-ish seconds, I think, when I timed it. I'm not sure exactly what it's supposed to be. But it will give you a certain amount of time before the shutter fires. And you can adjust how much time just based on how far over you push that lever. So looking from the back of our camera, on the right side, we have 2 knobs. So the one toward the front of the camera is your focusing knob, and it's labeled with distances on the side as well. And the one behind that is to wind and advance the film. On the left-hand side, we have a couple spring-loaded pulls and a readout for the built-in light meter. Let's just take a look for a second at that built-in light meter. So this is actually really cool. It's not always terribly accurate. I don't rely on it too much, but if you're out in daylight and you're kind of in a pinch, you don't have anything else, and you just want to get a ballpark reading, it actually still does a pretty good job, even though it's as old as it is. So what you do is you hit this small lever here on the top next to the light meter, and it actually toggles it open. And then what you do is over on the left, you take a look at where the needle is pointing, and it'll give you a readout. So anywhere from 0 down to 45. So what you do is you make note of that reading, and then here on the top, you take the given number and you align it with the speed of film you're using. So for example, let's say I got a readout of 5.6 and I was shooting 200 speed film. I would take that 5.6 and slide it over to 200. And now it tells me what shutter speed I need at any given aperture. So at 5.6, I'd want to shoot around 100th. At 16, I'd need to be down below 10 and 25. at 3.5, I could shoot at 300 and so on. Not super accurate, just kind of for a ballpark reading. And a lot of these older ones don't seem to work well, but mine actually does seem to be in pretty good condition here. It's kind of cool. All right, so now we'll just talk about loading this thing. So here on the bottom, in the middle is a tripod thread mount. And if you turn that to the left, the film back pops open and we can load our 120 film. So to do that initially, you will need an extra film spool. Usually if you pick these cameras up, there is hopefully one in there. Basically, you just reuse them from the last roll of film that you shot. So you have the empty reel on the top, and then you place your new film in the bottom the same exact way. And then once you've done that, you just break the seal on your roll of 120 and pull it up and over this gap here and place it into the groove of the empty spool. And once it catches, you just start turning the winder knob. And you're gonna keep going until you see a black arrow, and that black arrow aligns with the two red arrows in the center here. Once you've done that, pull the back down, turn it the opposite way to lock it closed. And then just take a look at the side of the camera here next to the winder. And you're gonna wanna continue. It takes a little bit of turning until you see the number 1. And this winder will actually lock. It'll stop you from turning it any further. And you're ready to take your first picture. This camera does not prevent you from taking multiple exposures. So the kind of upside of that is if you want to do a double exposure, it's really easy to do on this camera. You just wouldn't turn the film any further and you would take another shot. But the downside of that is that it's really easy to take a double exposure by accident. So just kind of keep that in mind. When you do want to advance the film to the next frame, you just push in this little lock here in the middle and begin turning, and that will release the winder and allow you to turn until it locks again, and that should read the next number, 2 in this case. So if you've only ever shot with a DSLR or an SLR, a point and shoot or something like that, what's kind of cool about these is that they have waist level viewfinders, so you actually look through the top to compose your shot. And there's no prism in these cameras, so everything's kind of backwards. If you want to move left, you move right. If you want to move right, you move left. Same with the tilting and so on. So that could take a little bit of getting used to. So that's kind of the whole camera in a nutshell, or at least what I've learned about it so far, and I'm really in love with it. In particular, this camera is, it kind of has a really nice soft glow to it. So it's not the most tack sharp lens in the world. You know, I wouldn't use it to take like fine detail shots, but it's beautiful for portraits. And actually, it's actually pretty good if you stop down a little bit, even for some kind of wide landscapes. It renders black and white beautifully. I haven't yet put a roll of color through it, but I'm gonna do that soon. And it has a pretty unique and beautiful look. I'm just a huge fan of it so far. If you have this camera or a similar one, or you're thinking about picking one up and you have any questions, just put them in the comments. So I've been working in video for over a decade, but I'm pretty much brand new to this film photography world, and I'm learning with the rest of you. But if you want to see what I'm working on, you can follow me over on my Instagram account @_reciprocity_failure. And you can also feel free to like and subscribe to this YouTube channel, as I'm gonna start posting regularly. So thanks a ton for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.